And thank you so much for joining us today. And the recording has started. Terrific. Thank you for joining us today. We've got a presentation lined up with individuals from Stanford University Libraries, and they're going to present using ePADD to process and provide access to email archives. We'll be able to take questions too, so as you have questions, please do type them in the chat box, and we'll get to them toward the end. Today we have Glenn Edwards, who is the Head of Technical Services in the Department of Special Collections and University Libraries with Stanford University Libraries. We also have Peter Chan, who's a digital archivist in the Department of Special Collections and University Archives at Stanford University Libraries. And we have Josh Schneider, Assistant University Archivist in the Department of Special Collections and University Archives at Stanford University Libraries. So again, please, as we go along with the presentation, put your questions in the chat box, and I'm going to turn it over to the ePADD folks and pass the ball. So they will now have controls.
Hi, everyone. As Renee mentioned, I'm Josh Schneider, ePADD Community Manager. I'm here with Glenn Edwards, our Project Director, and Peter Chan, our Project Manager. And we're here to talk to you about ePADD, which is free and open source computational analysis software that supports screening, browsing, and access for email collections. So Glenn's going to intro the project to give you some context. Then we're going to share some slides to bring you up to speed on why we developed the software and tell you a little bit more about it. And then we're going to dive in for a full demo. There should be plenty of time for Q&A and further discussion after the demo. We think it might make sense to hold off on taking questions until that discussion at the end, if that works for everybody. But please do feel free to add comments in the chat window, and we'll try to make sure that they stay on our radar. And if we don't answer them during the demo, then we'll get to them during the Q&A. So I'm going to pass the ball over to Glenn so she could speak a little bit more about getting started.
Thanks, Josh. I hope everyone can hear me. If not, just let the host know. So thank you for inviting us, the ePADD project, to talk to you today and do a demo. I'm going to talk a little bit about our involvement with email archiving and just contextually what's going on around the country. And then Josh and Peter will delve into the details about the project itself. Peter Chan and I have been involved with email archiving since 2011 as part of the AIMS project, which was Mellon funded. And one of the collections that we used as a sample contained about 50,000 email messages. And we tested a lot of different tools and did a lot of research at that point on methods for processing and making the email available. Unfortunately, most of the projects that dealt specifically with email at that time were all preservation projects, pretty much exclusively. The one project that Peter stumbled across was being built at Stanford by a computer science graduate student, and it was called Muse, part of the Moby social group in the computer science department at Stanford. And so we used that to process Creeley. It was the first collection we ever processed. And then working with the developer, the creator of it, Sudhindra Hangal, we decided to write a grant. So we're in our second grant now. Our first started, I think, probably 2013. And our one we're on currently with IMLS goes until 2018. Our goal in writing these grants and in developing ePADD was to have a tool that would allow us to process the collections and make them available. So that was our goal. So many other projects had tackled preservation. Our goal was to actually make them discoverable and available. So the first grant ended in 2015, and our first release of the ePADD software was that summer. And we're on version 3 now, and we have a few more releases during this grant. We did get some funds from Stanford as well, both from the library and from computer science. Those funds allowed us to do very specific things, one of which was to create the prototype discovery, or the prototype online discovery site. The one you see now, that you would see now, is a newer version based on that. So at the time when our first grant was ending and we were didn't know yet about the IMLS grant, we went and attended a email symposium at the Library of Congress, and they invited individuals from all across the country, state, federal government, repositories, predominantly academic, but other repositories as well. And it was a really interesting two-day session, basically talks by each institution on what the issues were in collecting email archive at their institution and what they were doing at that time. This led to the development of a sort of a survey of existing tools, and that has been adopted by these groups that are sort of working together on email archiving. So a spin-off of that symposium was one held by Harvard in 2016, so the following year, and it was on email archiving stewardship tools. And the goal there, a lot of the same players were there, but there were more institutions as well. The goal with that one was to find out and start discussing how data, metadata and data would import or export and move between the tools. So Harvard has a tool that's predominantly preservation called EASE. ePADD is not a preservation tool at this point. It tackles basically the rest of the stewardship cycle. And finally, in the fall of 2016, I joined the Mellon Task Force on Technical Approaches to Email Archives, and that's probably the most current sort of national effort right now. They have a developing website that you can go to. There's about 18 members of the task force from around the country again, and internationally as well. There's a nice bibliography being built. There's a list of the working groups, so the 18 individuals involved have sort of taken different aspects of what will be a report at the end, I think coming out in this fall or winter, on dealing with technical approaches, gaps, issues, and just definitions and existing tools. So I'm going to stop there and let Josh jump into the slides. He has a nice intro to our project. I don't know how to pass the ball, so someone else hopefully can.
Oh, Glenn, if you could just grab it, and then just pull it, to where you want it to land.
Okay. Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. So, thank you, Glenn, and thanks again, Renee. So as Glenn mentioned, we had a lot of reasons to create a tool like ePADD. Our reliance on and use of email over the last 40 years has developed rich archival material with the secondary benefit of recording social networks in the header information of senders and recipients. So you may recognize some of the folks here for being in the news recently for their email. Every presentation we give, I try to update this slide, and yeah, there's always a lot of updates. It seems more and more when we give this talk. So the importance of the email corpora of writers and public figures like these has guided our efforts in improving access to email collections. But it turns out that institutions find it really difficult to provide access to email for a couple main reasons. One is that the email can include potentially confidential information that donors and archives don't want to share without extensive screening. And second is that these email archives can be in the hundreds of thousands, or even, as Glenn mentioned, with government in the millions of messages, really compounding the problem. So we created ePADD to help try to solve some of these issues and make it easier for institutions to provide access to email and for researchers to discover and use it. Our first major release came out in June 2015 after 2 years of NHPRC funding. And as Glenn mentioned, we're now in our second major grant funded by IMLS, and you can see some of our other partners here. So what is ePADD? ePADD consists of 4 modules that build on each other, but can be run independently depending on the need. The appraisal module supports donors who want to screen out information from the archive prior to transferring it to a repository, including health and financial information. The processing module lets archivists further screen for sensitive information, as well as add descriptive metadata to the collection, including assigning authority headings. The discovery module is a web-based environment, providing a redacted view of the email archive, and that's intended to let researchers know whether the archive contains useful info before they travel to the repository. And the delivery module is intended to allow researchers access to the full archive, except for materials that have been restricted. It's currently intended to be run from Workstation Repositories Reading Room. So let's dive right in. Let's see. We are going to share. Okay. So we hope that you can see our screen right now. We're currently looking at the browse screen in our appraisal module. So when you first load up ePADD, you end up on a screen like this, and you can see that there's a lot of different fields where you can enter in information about the email that you want to analyze and process and make available. ePADD accepts email either through an IMAP connection or it accepts MBOX files. So there are some other file formats for email, but MBOX is fairly ubiquitous, and there's other software that exists to convert mail to MBOX. So we feel like covering the IMAP and MBOX bases that we're in fairly good shape in terms of accepting email to ingest. And then you would hit continue over here. And you could also identify multiple sources, so grab from a few different places at once. You would hit continue, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that right now, but I will tell you what happens. The first thing ePADD does is it deduplicates the mail, which is really important, especially if you're working off of a hard drive where a donor, let's say, or the creator may have kept multiple copies of the same message or archive over time. It also resolves names, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So we'll come back to that. But it resolves the names of correspondence to help cut down on the noise for visualization and for analysis. And then it extracts entities from the archive. So we have a custom named entity classifier, and we'll show you what that looks like. And it grabs entities according to categories from DBpedia that we've specified. So those are fine-grained categories of entities. And it does all of that when you first load the email archive, and then it relies upon those processes to drive the functionalities that we'll show you in a minute. So you've done all of that, you've imported the archive, and you end up on a screen like this. So you can see our overarching navigation at the top. We have these browse features over here. We have some search functionality within the appraisal module, and then you can export. And I'm going to go through some highlights of each of these. So sometimes there's a little bit of lag when we're working on these presentations, so please let us know in the chat window if we're talking about something and you haven't yet seen it, but we'll try to go slow enough that it catches up to us. So I've clicked on the correspondence window, and you can see here some of the top correspondence in the email archive. And when I leave my cursor over each of these names, you can see the different names and email addresses that have been resolved into this one correspondent. So this is really helpful when you're doing analysis on an email archive, so that all the different email addresses that have been associated with a person over the time that they've been corresponding with the email archive owner can sort of be concatenated so that it makes the archive a little bit less noisy, so you don't have so many different William Creelys, Bill Creelys, etc. So I mentioned here we can sort either alphabetically or we can sort by volume. There's a graph feature, and you're also able, in case, ePADD is doing its best guess to resolve these names, but if you want to modify anything that it's done automatically, you can also edit these correspondence, and we've added an interface to do that. You can also highlight if any of these are mailing lists in that interface. So that's another feature we think is really helpful, because we can rely upon that for some of our searching as well. Okay, so heading back to browse, we also can browse person entities and some fine-grained entities. So if we click on person entities, here we're just showing the top 10 here, but we can select down to the top 100 and then cycle through those. Again, you can see the different names that have been resolved from the email archive. And if you were to click on any of those correspondents from that last screen, or you click on any of these people over here, you're brought to the actual individual message. I'll show you just real quickly what that looks like, but we're not going to focus on that just yet. So this is our message browsing interface here. And you can see that since I clicked from Robert Creeley's name, he's highlighted throughout the message. And we have our different entities have been highlighted according to the type of entity that they are. And you can see some search faceting over here and some actions that we'll talk about in a minute, as well as a way to navigate through the different resulting messages in your set. So we'll come back to this interface. I also want to show you something we do that we think is pretty cool and pretty unique. So if we click on other entities from the browse interface, we can see here lots of fine-grained types, different categories of entity that I mentioned. We rely upon some of the categories in DBpedia. So ePADD recognizes entities in these categories, and we'll drill down in a second, but it also learns from these categories. So for instance, I'm going to click on diseases here. So these are entities that show up in the disease and syndrome category in DBpedia. And you can see that there's just a handful over here. In this case, all of these, and not all, it's not a perfect algorithm, so not all of these are what we would necessarily consider diseases. But if something has a score of 1 over here, that means that it is a one-to-one match with an entity that shows up in DBpedia. And you can see the number of messages that show up that are involved. Now, if we wanted to merge any of these entities or suppress any of these entities from showing, we can also do that on a new Edit Entities interface that we introduced in the last version. So I'm going to back up and just select another fine-grained category so you can see a little bit more how helpful this could really be. So for instance, we have New York Times and NY Times. So if we wanted to, we could merge those entities. And as you get further down, sorry, my mouse is slipping. You can see that we also have scores of less than 1. So what that means is that there isn't an entry that just for, say, the Pen Club or the Reform Party in DBpedia that we've taken from, probably because there's lots of Reform parties, and it wasn't sure which one we were talking about, but it resembles the other types of entities in this fine-grained category. So ePADD has assigned it a relative confidence score. In this case, a fairly low relative confidence score. We also have the Ain't No Party. So I'm going to back up now and show you some of our other browsing features. If I can avoid our sharing menu and sneak behind it. Okay. So we also have a folder view, the ability to browse folders, and account level view, which helps folks who are interested in the provenance of the messages in the original order. We also have this image attachment browsing interface. So ePADD supports native browsing for image attachments. There are other attachment types that ePADD doesn't render natively. We rely on use of third-party software, either if it's current file types, then you could use potentially the current software to view it, or there's software like QuickView Plus that lets you view some legacy file formats. So we didn't focus on that, but we did think that there was a lot of value in creating this image attachment browser. So we think this is pretty neat. We've recently added this advanced filtering interface, so you could, if you're getting too many low quality signatures, for instance, you want to filter that a little bit more, you can do that now. Something that's really great is you could take any one of these messages, and you can see here a little link, and if I click on this link, it brings me to the related message. So we think that's pretty neat. And we'll show you some other stuff you could do with attachments during the export screen. Something else we have is this lexicon. So ePADD supports, besides browsing, a lot of different kinds of searching. If you're not familiar with lexicons, these are thematic groups of thematic categories of keywords. So for instance, if we go down to this sensitive lexicon and I edit, you can see here underneath the category, we have different themes, right? We have jobs, legal, students, and these are just keywords that are listed underneath. So the value of doing this is you can really plug and play and fine tune. All of this is editable, and you can also create your own lexicon. And you can fine tune this and let it help you search for whole categories of information. So in this instance, you can test and see the results of the lexicon, and you can see all the different hits that you get for each of these different categories and test the different parts of the category. So we have a lexicon working group that we've formed within the ePADD community, and they've developed some of these other ones that we think are actually pretty neat. So for instance, here's a lexicon that's based on the different roles. So this is a lexicon that might be helpful if you were working on a composer's email collection or another producer's or someone in the music business. So we think that's pretty cool. It can be really helpful for finding sensitive information. We also have the sensitive messages, which is basically a regular expression search. So here, Peter has gone in and edited the messages so that we protect the privacy of Bob Bertolf and Bob Creeley. But you can see that the regular expressions would be highlighted over here, and these are customizable. So for instance, if we decided we didn't want to, we're now in the appraisal module, which is intended for the donor. The processing module, which I'll show you in a minute, has a lot of the same functionality. So if we were as a donor, we decided, hey, you know, I don't want the archive to see my social security numbers, we could say do not transfer, and we want to apply that to both of these messages. So we'd say apply to all. And we might even say here as a note to ourselves, social security number, you know, don't transfer. Well, my spelling is terrible, but I think you get the idea. Okay, and apply to all. So we also have an advanced simple search. This is just like a keyword search that you might do through Google. And then we have something called advanced search. And this is we think, a fairly sophisticated interface to do complicated searches. So when you're talking about those really large email archives, potentially hundreds of thousands of messages or more, we think this is a pretty helpful. We have different categories you could search across. So for instance, if you wanted to search across the disease, search for particular entities, or you wanted to search across, say, particular entity types. So let's say that you wanted to search for all messages that contain entities that are in that disease category from DBpedia, but that don't arrive as part of a mailing list. So you could then do something like that, and we'll see if we get any hits. So there are 4 messages. So we think you could potentially use all of these search features to help really narrow down the amount of manual searching you might have to do as both a donor or a curator, and then also as an archivist. So let's say you've done all of that browsing and searching, and you've marked messages up for transfer to the repository. We've introduced in the last version this new export interface. You can review all the unrestricted messages that will transfer, any messages where you've added annotations, any messages you've restricted, as well as any messages you've decided not to export. And then you can export those to the next module for ePADD, or you can export just the attachment. So as we mentioned, ePADD supports some native browsing of attachments, but if you were interested in just exporting and browsing all the documents separately or any of these other files, you can also do that here. So let's say that you've selected all of your files that you want to export to the repository as a donor, and you transfer those to the repository. The repository gets on a flash drive or some other method they've got in your email through ePADD. So what they do is they open it up in the processing module. There are 2 collections that we've worked on in this particular archive, including Robert Creeley. We haven't yet assigned some information, but this is where you would do that here. Information about the collection, maybe a scope and content note, rights and conditions note. Some of this is actually extracted automatically by ePADD, so you don't need to enter in this information. But if you want to add any of this other institution, repository, collection, or accession information, you can do that here, and that work carries over to all of the public-facing modules that we have, our discovery module and delivery module. So you can see that we have a lot of the same features here, so I'm not going to review those. But I did want to show you this authority interface that we have. So this is a way, as an archivist, for you to point to correspondence in the email archive and match them to DBpedia entries or VIAF or FAST or NAF entries for these different individuals who show up that have authority records. And you can now confirm that this person is Henry Myers, who shows up in the email archive. Or if you don't like any of these, you can click on Assign an Authority and add any of your own IDs, including a local ID. So you can decide as a policy within your institution how many of these, and maybe you want to go by volume, or you know that there's some correspondence that you especially want to call out in your description, and it automatically saves that work. So if you then were to go to the export screen, in processing, you have this additional option to export all of those authorities that you've tied to linked authorities and export those as a CSV file. So in the future, we're really thinking about exporting the correspondence and extracted entities as linked open data, as well as the headers to GraphML, a social network visualization file format. But we think this is pretty cool, and we're hoping to make it even more sophisticated in the future. So once you've done that as a processing archivist, you've added your description, you've done some more of this browsing and searching, and you feel fairly comfortable that you've identified and screened for the sensitive, confidential, and legally protected information, and you've done your best to either use I haven't shown you, but the lexicon could also be used potentially to come up with something along the lines of archival series that would help a researcher navigate the collection. And you've done your part, let's say, to assign authorities and otherwise reveal the intellectual content. What you would do is go to export, and you would then export to 2 other modules. The discovery module, which is a web-based module that provides a redacted view, and we'll show you what that looks like because Stanford has a live instance of that online, as well as a delivery module, which, as we mentioned earlier, is intended for full access in a repository's reading room. And you get the full messages, headers, as well as attachments of everything that hasn't been, say, restricted or not transferred by a donor. Everything that hasn't been either restricted by a processing archivist or not transferred by the donor. So I want to show you what that interface looks like for our online discovery module. So I just went to epad.stanford.edu. So you can also go there. And we have a couple of collections on here now. We have a few more in process. So if we click on Robert Creeley, and you can see here all this information has been entered. And we have links to the finding aid and catalog record. If we enter, now you can see for privacy reasons and copyright reasons, we can't provide access at Stanford to the full email archive. But we can do a lot more than the traditional catalog records and finding aids. So for instance, we have browse and search, and we can still browse all of these correspondence. And you can see all of the different names, and in this case, redacted email addresses, where you just see the name part. You don't see the domain part of the email address, have been resolved, and the user can see that. You can also see a graph, as I mentioned earlier, of the volume of email exchanged over time. And then you can look at the persons, organizations, and locations in the email archive. So all of that fine-grained entity extraction that happens when the donor first ingested the email archive, that's all carried over. And of course, the processing archivist, if they want, can make changes to the names or the entities. They can modify and merge that stuff. But all of it then becomes available as data to a researcher who might be trying to decide whether it's worth a trip to an institution's repository to access the full corpus. So you can do the same with organizations and locations. Our latest release, 3.0, introduced more of the fine-grained entities, and it's possible in future iterations of the discovery module, the browsing will get a little bit more fine-tuned as well. We also have the same search interface, advanced search interface, and something called a query generator. But before I go there, I want to show you what we mean when we say redacted. Right? What can't you see? So here we have that same message view that we looked at in the other modules, but you can see again that the email addresses and the headers are redacted. The subject is redacted, except for named entities which might appear, and the message is redacted except for named entities which might appear. So if I scroll through, we could show you some messages that include these named entities that ePADD has identified. So this is a lot more information, and if I were to click on one of these, it would show me all the other messages where Carla shows up as a correspondent. So I can see all the other people that Carla was speaking with, as well as some of the other locations and organizations and other types of entities that show up in those messages. So we think that's pretty neat and a lot more information than you might get from a traditional finding aid or catalog record. We also introduced something called a query generator. So a query generator basically takes any block of text and it extracts entities from that block of text and then compares all those extracted entities to the entities available in the email archive. So we'll show you what that looks like and why that's helpful. So I'm going to select some text from this Black Mountains poet entry in Wikipedia. Robert Creeley was a poet. He was in the Black Mountain Poets School. And I'm going to highlight this background paragraph. And I'm going to paste that right here in the query generator. We'll search for that, and you can see that ePADD is looking up terms from this paragraph, and it's highlighted all of the matches in the email archive. So for instance, we see here Buckminster Fuller, and if I were to click on that, even though we're in the discovery module, we can still see all the redacted messages in which those hits show up. So we think this is actually really powerful functionality. I've just pasted in a paragraph, but you could potentially paste in whole monographs or dissertations and do all of your research at once. So a really powerful browsing feature that depends on that named entity recognition we do earlier. So the last thing I want to show you is what it looks like if a researcher actually shows up in the reading room to access the full corpus, messages, and attachments. So this is our delivery module. And this is what a researcher, again, this is all of this information would be filled out, just like we saw in Discovery. And you can see that they basically have all the same features that the donor and the archivist have in order to browse the email archive, except for the regular expression search. We figure there probably is a use for researchers who want to do that type of searching, but just because it could potentially be tied to so many different types of restricted or protected information, for now, we haven't included that regular expression search within the delivery module. But you still get access to all the same full messages and attachments that you would otherwise be able to see. But instead of the different features we had earlier to restrict or not transfer a message, I actually forgot to mention all of the modules include this ability to let yourself know that you've seen the message. This is an action we call the review action. And that way, if you're reviewing the archive, either as a donor or an archivist or a researcher, you can always let yourself know that you've seen either an individual message or sets of messages, so you don't need to look at it again if you don't want to. But as a researcher, what you might want to do is decide that a message or set of messages is so great that you want to request it from the repository according to the policies of that institution. So you can do that here by selecting this cart icon, and maybe you want to add an annotation like add to chapter 2. And we can apply that to all the 110 messages that we've selected, just like that. And now if we go to the cart, you can see that we have all of these messages. And you can go down here and request them. Then all we have to do is save this link over here, and I would save it to an Mbox file. And it's really up to the institution to decide how this goes about. At Stanford, this is probably an action that would be undertaken by public services, or it would be saved to a shared drive that the user doesn't have access to. Because at Stanford, according to our guidelines, we want to review the types of information that the person is downloading so that they don't walk out with the whole archive. But, you know, as time passes and more institutions develop different policies around that, it could be that policy will change even at Stanford. So that's it for the demo. We just have a handful more slides to give you a sense of where we're going next for this project, and some different ways in which you can learn more about ePADD and even get involved. So this will just be another few minutes, and then we'll get right into the discussion and Q&A. So I mentioned a few of these, but these are the different areas that we're planning on focusing in the next year and a half or so that we have left of the IMLS grant. Cross-collection search is really interesting. Annotation management, we looked at some of those annotations, but we're thinking about making those a little bit more structured, or at least enabling more structured annotations. We mentioned the linked open data and the potential there, the possibilities there. As Glenn mentioned, there's a lot of current projects, working groups, and initiatives around email right now. So it's really important that we're part of that conversation and that we try to the best of our ability to make sure we're as interoperable as possible and that we accommodate all these other projects and we're in touch with them. And one of those areas that we really want to be flexible for different workflows, for different institutions, is around ingest and preservation. So that's something that we're continuing to look at. And then potentially, possibly not during this grant period, but long-term, something we're really thinking about is the potential for a shared discovery or public delivery service. So that we can consolidate some of these instances like ePADD's instance of the discovery environment so that researchers have one place where they can search across all these email collections. We think it could have a lot of potential to improve research and lower the bar for some institutions to help serve email through ePADD. So we have a lot of different ways in which you can learn more about ePADD and get some support. We have some forums available online. We store some use cases and collect use cases and user stories all through our website. We mentioned that lexicon working group. If you're interested in learning more about that, please get in touch with us. We're always looking for more people to join and potentially submit lexicons. And of course, we're always looking for folks to support the software development. So we're a free and open source tool. All of our code is available on GitHub. So if you're interested in forking the code or assisting with development, please get in touch with us and let us know. We have a website available online that consolidates links to all this information, full user guide that's updated regularly with each new release. As we mentioned, our forums and GitHub are some other places you can learn about ePADD. This is what our website looks like, so you can see some links off. Yeah, so that's it as far as our presentation goes directly. Of course, we're very grateful to ALA and the Digital Curation group for hosting us. So at this point, we'd love to open it up to questions and discussion and hear from you what you'd like to see in ePADD, anything that interested you, please let us know.
If I could just mention one thing, in addition to all the things that Josh went over about how you can learn more, get involved. We hold focus group meetings, usually tied to our partner meetings, but we're also holding them at our regional meeting this spring and hopefully SAA in July. Those are very good ways both to find out issues or future developments and news stories from users of ePADD, those who are testing it out or using it, but also to find out just what are issues in general with archiving email. So I just wanted to bring that up in case anybody's attending any of those meetings, just keep an eye out. Thanks.
Thanks, Glenn. That's a great point.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions?
If you don't have a mic, you can enter your question in the chat window. We're glad to review any of those functionalities in more detail, or if there's anything that we went over too quickly. I think we have some time now. We'd be glad to review it.
Hi, this is Renee. While people are thinking of their questions to get them into the chat box, I had one that occurred to me. You went over the screening, and there's kind of a two-part process for screening the emails. And I was just wondering, how much of that are you able to do automatically, you know, through a program or a code that you write? And how much would you say that the human beings still have to assess?
It's a great question. There are a lot of automated functions. I think Josh alluded to some of them, but we were also trying to be efficient and do this in a condensed way. So when you're ingesting an archive into ePADD, there's a lot of automated processes that happen. The different email addresses for someone are grouped together. All the NLP work is done, deduplication of messages. So there's a whole series of things that happen automatically. User intervention in sort of cleanup or in reviewing and cleaning up data really depends on an institution's staffing levels, their goals, and the size of the archive. At most academic institutions, so far, most of the email archives that we're capturing are not that large. I think our largest is just under 1 million, as opposed to federal government where you're talking about multiple millions. I think we've talked to one repository that processed an email archive of 1,000 messages. Our smallest was 50, I think 50,000. So we're allowing, what we wanted to do is build in the capacity or the ability for people to merge entities, to flag things as mailing lists that are not automatically flagged as mailing lists, to correct correspondence, how they're grouped, the resolution of correspondence. And that is really up to the institution. So the program is there to give you the method, the ways of doing it, and it's up to your repository to figure out what your process and workflow will be.
Yeah, one thing I want to add is, say for sensitive information, we add the regular expression search for social security number and credit card number. And instead of you have to review all, say, the quickly email corpus, there are 50,000 email messages. If we don't have this function, then if you want to search that, then you have to go through all the 50,000 messages. But now with ePADD help, actually we filter it to 20 messages. And out of this 20 messages, then you need to, I would recommend people to also go through this 20 messages. And because sometimes it's false hit, because a regular expression search, a number with that particular regular expression may not be, say, social security number, regular expression may be some other number. So that's how the manual additional layer of reviewing is necessary. But instead of reviewing 50,000 messages, now you are reviewing 20 messages. Same for diseases, so the same thing. And with ePADD help, we filter down to 4 messages. And now you have to review that 4 messages to see whether those messages are really containing sensitive information or not. So I would say ePADD have some automated process to filter out some message for you to review again. But hopefully we will narrow it down to a manageable scale, so it is much easier for you to review than you don't have ePADD to help.
I see some questions. Sorry, I see some questions in the chat window. I just want to make sure we get to. So one is, what email formats can be ingested into ePADD? So ePADD accepts email in mbox format. There's some flavors of mbox, so you might just double check when you're ingesting. We have a way to review. We didn't show off, but you can look at any errors that may have taken place when you ingested. So there's lots of different places where those could have been introduced before the messages came into ePADD. So if you're working with mbox, you might just be aware that there's several flavors and other software exists to potentially normalize that. And then we also can ingest IMAP mail. So as I mentioned, the third-party software already exists that can convert between formats. So that wasn't an area that we really wanted to focus on. But we thought between mbox, which is fairly ubiquitous, and the IMAP connection, that we opened ourselves up to most different situations where people would want to work with email here. Can you add additional words to the different lexicon categories, or is this limited to vocabulary determined by DBpedia? So there's a couple functionalities there that I think I may not have done a good enough job describing. So the lexicons don't rely on DBpedia. Those are those tiered thematic keyword searches. And those are entirely editable, creatable, modifiable by the user. ePADD ships with about 10 that were created by that working group, but otherwise it's completely up to you to create them. But the DBpedia categories, yes, there could be potential if somebody is a developer to look at other DBpedia categories, but we expect for most people, those are the categories, the current categories are the ones that people would be using for the fine-grained classification. That said, there's the potential long-term to look at additional categories or different categories. So if there are particular categories that you're interested in, please let us know. So actually with Gmail, Peter, do you want to talk about importing from Gmail?
Well, Gmail, there's a takedown service from Google, so you can go to that service, say you want to have a copy of your email, then Google will let you know when it's ready. When it's ready is a link to downloading all your emails in mbox format. and then we can take in that mbox file.
So it looks like two really good messages, ideas here. So one is, can researchers flag messages in discovery for staff review, or must they be on the site using the delivery module, on site using delivery to request individual messages? So something we've introduced in the latest release are unique IDs for messages. And we do not currently allow researchers to flag messages within discovery and then potentially, I don't know, send those to public services staff or automatically request those messages. I think we're still seeing how researchers use that discovery module and what would work best. But I do think that's an interesting idea. We have thought about virtual reading rooms and other use cases for individuals requesting materials. Since so much of that is really up to the institution, it's tough to know exactly what functionality to build into ePADD, but I think that's a really interesting idea to keep track of stuff, keep track of any messages you might want to request, if nothing else. Can levels of redaction and discovery be customized, allowing subject lines to display? Not currently. We've considered other models of redaction. That isn't one that I know that we've talked about in particular, but yeah, we're always trying to think about ways in which we can make that even more useful while still be protecting the privacy of the creator and third parties and copyright. So that's something we could talk about more.
Can I jump in here, Josh? One of the things I wanted to mention about sort of redaction and what displays in the discovery environment, at Stanford, we've made a decision with administration that we are not displaying full text online, and that's hence the redacted full text, and we're only releasing metadata. But if you're at another institution where you are able to flag certain emails as, yes, I could release full text online, that is something we have considered. And I don't know if it will be tackled during this grant, but it's definitely on a future roadmap.
Thanks, Glenn, for clarifying that. So those are all the questions that I see here. If anybody has any other questions, we have a little bit more time. Oh, I hear a wait. I think there's a question in process. We'll hold off for a moment. So at this point, we're happy to stay for the hour to answer any questions, but I think it seems like most of the presentation is over. So thank you so much again to ALA, to the interest group, to Renee, and
well,
Alice.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn, Peter, and Josh. This was really interesting. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today, and I'm really I was fascinated by this tool. I really had no idea. This is really quite interesting, and I can just see what a goldmine it is for researchers who are trying to understand, the communication that's left behind, in emails.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you. Well, if people have questions, feel free, to follow up afterwards. We'll go ahead and end the recording here. I don't think we have any more questions. Is that right, Josh?
There's one more question that was sent.
Yeah. So the question is, does ePADD recognize emails in other languages and have the ability to recognize sensitive words or redaction? So in ePADD, the sensitive message, there's a few areas. One area is the regular expression. So regular expression now is the social security number and credit card number. So you run across different language because it's basically numbers. But the other area of filtering sensitive information is in the lexicon. So you can, ePADD, you can enter foreign language in the lexicon. You can create a lexicon that is in Russian or French or whatever language you want. So in that sense, you can also filter out sensitive information. And the third area that are potential for filtering sensitive information is in the fine-grained entity. So fine-grained entity, basically we rely on wiki. Wiki is there's a multi-language, different language of wiki, and then it pull out the structured part is pulled into a format called DPpedia. So that's also multi-language. So it also, in that sense, you can also recognize foreign language.
Does anybody have any other questions? Again, if you're interested in learning more about the project, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can visit our website and see some of those links to other resources that are available, as well as links to the GitHub page to download it and try it out. We'd love to hear your feedback, and there are other opportunities to join the community. There's a mailing list to learn more whenever we're giving a presentation, a webinar, or holding one of those working groups or user forums. So please sign up for our mailing list to hear the latest and greatest about all our new releases and new opportunities.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that interesting and very helpful presentation. We'll go ahead and end the recording now. And please look for the link. We'll send out a link once the recording is ready, and we'll have it posted so you can view again and share. So thanks again, everybody.